In Vietnam, I was a sergeant in a LRRP company, and then it was Ranger Company. I was like high status. I could get on a helicopter and fly anywhere I wanted to go. Your stripes, just like in the Navy or the Air Force or anything, people can look at you. You got a sergeant thing on, and your CIB and jump wings.
Mhm.
If you're 101st Eagles or your Special Forces or whatever that is, they know immediately who you are as a person. In this world, you don't. I mean, in this world, in the civilian world, I could remember. I could remember one of my first jobs out of college was I was a stockbroker for E.F. Hutton, and I could just remember feeling how I was I was alone. There's no kinship or brothership or there was friendship, but nobody was going to go out would die for you. Our guys would die for you. This November 20th mission where we lost two uh, LRRP teams, 12 guys. Everybody was wounded. Four guys were killed. And and I was on a team where I was on another heavy team that we couldn't get to them, but they brought a helicopter in from the guys that were just in the back, at Camp Eagle, the Rangers there, and TT Tesoro, when he ran up, he was leading this group of guys they just put together up a hill, wearing his shorts. He didn't have, I think he had a t-shirt on and his Ho Chi Minh sandals and a Car 15 and a bandolier ammunition. These guys would they were amazing.
So it sounds like, I mean, what I'm hearing from you, it sounds like, well, I related in my mind to what I've heard so many times from other combat vets. Um, we'll talk about the awfulness of war and the terribleness of it, but they'll say, but there is something that you miss about it. There's a camaraderie, there's the adrenaline, there's the
Yeah.
intensity of it, there's the simplicity of it. In
It
that,
is that's a great one, simplicity of it.
yeah.
It's simple. You're a sergeant, you're a captain, you're a lieutenant, but easy. Boom.
At the same time, the decisions you're making, it's simple, but the decisions you're making are very important because they do involve life and death.
Yeah. The difference between say our unit, a LRRP unit, and an infantry unit or other army units, um, when you're out with six guys and you're always surrounded because you're going behind enemy lines. So you're out there gathering intelligence. There's a difference between here's my point. They would always say, well, we got on the job training. We didn't get on the job training, not in the LRRPs. You had to pass all of first of all, it was voluntary, but you didn't just go out on a team. You had to be vented, I guess is the term nowadays. And one of the things was could you be on stay 5 days with 4,000 enemy soldiers you're always surrounded. You're surrounded 24 hours a day, and you better be able to hold it together. And if, we'd find out really quick if somebody could or couldn't. You'll hear stuff about the SOG guys or the Special Forces guy, and they're on Navy SEALs. All these guys are really are, Force Recon and the Marines. These guys are super close together,
Yeah.
and that's one of the reasons why.
Well, so was that the main attraction to you then to the LARPs? I mean, did you before your alert and you're making the decision to volunteer, is this the stuff you were picking up?
No, no, I
Here's
didn't know.
the
I
type
didn't
of,
know any of mine was very simple. I went through AIT, which is Advanced Infantry Training, and I can remember that that they would have like kind of war games, and we got ambushed, and I could still remember all of the fake, the M6, they had the little suppressors on it, but they're shooting blanks. But I remember how easy it was to get ambushed. And I thought, wow, you know, 100 guys or 50 guys or 60 guys make a hell of a lot of noise.
mm,
And so I thought, oh man. So I get to Vietnam, and they bring people out to try to enroll you in different things if you want to go into different. There's a couple of different things, and one of them was this McDougal was his name. Showed up, and he looked pretty cool. He had his LRRP stuff on. I mean, he was alert, And nobody knew what that meant. But he said, okay, here, I'm going to explain this to you so you really get it. You guys are 11 Bravo. That means that you're going to go into the infantry. And, God bless you. I hope everything works out. But let me tell you something. Every You might be on a fire base and think you're safe. The NVA knows they got a map of every fire base in Vietnam. They know where you're at.
Mm.
They don't know where we're at. We go out behind enemy lines, five, six guys. And this may sound crazier, but it's safer behind the lines it is in front of the lines where they know where you're at. And my hand went up. I volunteered, me and another guy, and that was it. And people thought we were crazy, but I thought this makes sense.
And I mean, my understanding is that the LRRPs, I mean, you're a small group out there. You're not out there looking for a fight, right?
Yeah,
You may
that was
get
the
into
other
them, but
attraction.
you're out to gather information. And so you're not out there ambushing. You're out there looking for information so that the enemy can be ambushed by someone else. Is that right?
Exactly. That was our mission in the beginning.
Yeah.
Till we became Rangers and they changed our TO&E where we did pull ambushes, which I didn't like. I hated that part, because I felt it was, you know, unfair. It sounds stupid, but unfair. If I'm going to get in a fight with you head on and you pull right, your gun and I got mine, okay, it's self-defense. Like that's, we're out, looking for where the guys are. I did not want to be a killer. I didn't want that to be, you know, the way people thought of me later.
Right. What was the difference between LRRP and Recondo?
Recondo is a school, Reconnaissance Commando Doughboy. It was a school that General Westmoreland had invented for, and the Special Forces took it over. It was MACV, the Fifth Special Forces in Latrang held this Recondo School, and what it was designed for is the Special Forces guys, guys that had been who knew their stuff. We would go, you had to be 6 months in country, you had to be in a LRRP unit, you had, something like their SEAL or a paracommando or something like that. And
Yeah.
then you had to volunteer to go to Recondo School, and there they trained you how to become a team leader. You got trained on everything. The last week of the school was like you bet your life thing because it was a live mission, guys got killed. Some of the buildings on the site were named after different guys that didn't make it through the school. They got killed in the last
Wow.
week.
So then, should we think of Recondo then as you graduate from that school, and then does that make you an elite unit
Yeah,
among LRRPs then?
yeah, because you get a patch. And what I didn't realize was a lot of guys that went to the school didn't make it, but they had to continue through the school, but maybe they didn't graduate. I didn't know that stuff because I hear somebody was going to go to Recondo School. I thought they're automatically would always make it, but they didn't always make it.
Now, if memory serves, during this last part of your school, when you're actually out on a real mission, that's the mission when you capture the NVA officer.
Yeah, yeah, that was my
What is
last
that?
mission.
What's that story?
Well, they put us on our teams to go out, and Louis LePage was the Special Forces cadre that went with us, and another guy, I can't remember his name. And I was walking point, and I ran into about 13 NVA sitting eating. I was pretty good at finding stuff like that, but I literally walked into them, and I could just still remember them, like look, there's the look on their eyes because it was really close. And so I pulled up and I fired. And one of the, the things that you practice was, I empty a magazine and then I turn to run back behind the slack man who empties a magazine and to pull back because, you're a small team
Right.
and you don't know how that could be the point element of a much larger NVA group. So I turn around to run and I look up and the two guys behind me were just running. It scared them, So there was a guy, and I hate to say this, but one of them was a special forces captain he was there just to get his Recondo patch. And oh man, LePage was an E7, but he had more power out in the jungle than that captain did. And that guy was I mean, LePage was so pissed off you couldn't believe it. But they ran on us, so I'm left out there in the open, and I just turned around and started firing. And then the next thing I heard was LePage coming to get out of the way, and I heard him coming over, and he had a sawed off M79, and he was shooting, putting down um, fire. So we got out of there, and then we pulled back, and then I think it was the next day we were going to go back in the same place, and but by then they brought in the reaction force of guys from their it was from Recondo School, which was a bunch of CIDG guys, mercenaries and
Yeah.
mountain. So LePage he goes, you guys pissed me off, Chambers. You're going to lead, you're going to be the point man, and dude, you're going to be behind him. And I was like, okay. So this is my dream come true. I hate to say it sounds really bizarre. My dream come true was to lead men into combat. But to me, it was like combat, like World War II combat, and I'm out in front and I'm walking, and I was like I said, I was pretty good at finding stuff. First thing I did was I found the spot, and there was 13 packs all in a circle. So those guys had capped out. There was nobody there. So the guys are checking them, and I went on with duty. We went on ahead and LePage. We went, further up this trail, and I'm walking, and suddenly this NVA steps out from this tree, like right there in front of me, and I could see he didn't have a weapon on, and I'm not going to shoot some unarmed guy, even though that's what you're supposed to do in that situation.
Mm.
But I tried to get him to stop, and to whatever however we said surrender, but he didn't. He turned around
Oh,
and started running. You
Chuhoi.
know, yeah,
Yeah.
started running into the jungle. So I just ran after him and I tackled him like a football tackle and got him down on the ground. And he was yelling, like for his buddies. And I took my car 15, which is, like that big with the little flash suppressor on it. And I turned it around and stuck it. So it was like in the side of his mouth, and he shut up. And I'm on the top of him on the ground like this. And LePage comes up and he goes, I wouldn't pull the trigger if I were you, because I looked down and I had the thing would have shot through him and shot into my leg, would have shot myself. It was one of those kind of funny moments later that we talked about. They pulled an ambush and they ambushed like 4 or 5 guys, whatever it was, and I think some were nurses, and which would really piss off the NVA, or they're going to come back for that. But Contreras screwed up because he wanted to take credit for his kill. So instead of taking off and getting out of there, they stayed in the same place where they had the ambush. They set up. Well, the NVA knew where they were, and they kept attacking him. And then somehow they'd gotten what they believe was a Chicom mine, which is I've seen one in Vietnam. They're like a directional type of a mine that you can push up and set, and that's what and it's full of metal or whatever, bolts, and that's what blew against those guys. And the guys that came and rescued him was our guys back in the rear at the time that they came out and got them. We had to still stay out in the jungle for I guess 2 more days because the weather was so bad they couldn't fly a helicopter in there. And so we just what we call laid dog, which meant we didn't do nothing. We weren't looking for anything. We'd been through an area where there was so many bunkers. It was really scary to see a big bunker that was, really built, as fighting trenches. And I remember we just came upon them, but luckily they weren't there. They probably were over where it moved over where obviously where Contreras' team was, which was like a click away, a couple clicks away or something like that. Whatever, it was a long distance.
So Contreras' team was overrun then, basically?
Yeah, basically.
Yeah. And you say and when in your tour did this happen roughly in the
Early in November 20th, we still celebrated. And you'll always hear about Billy Walkabout, the Indian, he should have got the Congressional Medal of Honor, we think. He got wounded in the hands. He was on that mission and he like patched guys up and helped guys, fought, because they kept launching attacks up that hill, and he fought till they took him out, and so he got Distinguished Service Cross for that.
You say so after this event, it was, you know, this marks kind of a turning point for you. Um, and so how so? How did this impact you losing these guys on this mission?
The war became real. I mean, this became a real thing. This wasn't like on, like on the movie The Green Berets where they go in and, they're all in a group and, one guy gets shot, but they've got this mission. This wasn't a movie. This was like real. It became that you can lose guys that you just had breakfast with the a few hours earlier. And I don't know, it just became more serious, I guess would be another word for it. We're going in the Ashaw Valley. Nobody had been, the last group that'd been in the Ashaw Valley was the 173rd. They lost 26 helicopters in 26 minutes. And that was like in 67, so there was a whole year had passed. And that was a main area where North Vietnamese were coming in from the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And so we were there for 4 days on a 5-day mission. The next day, 5 days, we're going to get out. So we're all excited. And we're sitting around. I was going to say, if you know Laos, there's the mountain where the Ashaw Valley is. Um, Laos is right there, the mountains. And every afternoon, about 4 or 5 o'clock, 4 o'clock, the storms come over those mountains, and it's thunder and all that. And Mother Rucker, who was another great guy on our team, was the radio man. And you're supposed to call in a situation report every hour, let them know we're okay. And we're all sitting around joking, and the storm came over, and I remember feeling that it pelted us. It was so cold, it pelted us with like, what am I trying to say? Snow,
Or hail? Yeah,
hail.
yeah, yeah.
So it hailed them just for a little bit, and then it passed, and then it was still storming. We thought, well, and I was sitting on the side of the hill, and I looking down at my claymore because when we'd set up, we'd put our claymore mines out around us. And so I saw the back of my mind. I thought, it's not good. If I could see the back, I'm going to get the back blast. So I just went down and I moved it further down the hill, thank goodness. And I crawled back up. I had this indigenous this little thing that I'd gotten off of an MBA, that was this oil cloth. It was the best piece of equipment I had in Vietnam. It was great, kept you dry, you'd sleep on it. But I had over my head, it's for the rain. And I didn't see this, but I was told later that Mother Rucker keyed the handset to call in a sit rep, and the lightning bolt came down. We didn't know it was lightning. All I know was I heard nothing, and the next thing I saw was this brilliant light, and I was going up in the air. And I thought, this is the end of my life. I mean, I didn't have no thought. I'm just going up into the air, and it was bright. And then I heard the sound, and I actually believed this was back then, but I didn't talk about it, that my body was blown into thousands of pieces. And then I came back down on the ground, and I was down like about maybe 30 so feet away down this hill, and I hit on my back. And I remember it was all really quiet. I was unconscious, and I came to, and I remember looking down at my legs, and steam was coming off my legs, which is not a good sign.
Right.
And I couldn't move them, and I kept waiting for, our throats to be cut because I thought we'd been somebody thrown a grenade in or some kind of thing that blew us up. And I thought my legs were gone. And I turned around and I didn't have any rifle, I had nothing. And I just started pulling myself back up to this knoll where we had been. And I found my rifle, and I found my clacker. The clacker is the thing that detonates the Claymore mine. And it was melted. It was this hard plastic. And you could see where something had hit it and just like melted, like the lightning came down and fanned out. And I remember telling somebody not that long ago who's an electrician, I said, well, I used to say I would correct people and say, well, I didn't really get hit by lightning. The lightning hit the radio and it fanned out. He goes, no, you were hit by lightning. You were grounded. You told me you were all laying on the ground. So if one of you had been standing up, they'd have been fried. But we weren't. We were all laying down. So that lightning hit us. and then it fanned out, and then it blew the backblast of our claymores, which was probably me going up in the air from that the waves of the shock waves. And then Gary Linder on his he had a percussion grenade in his backpack and that blew. So it flew him even further. I found him way down in this no, little part of this little. He was about 45 or 50 feet away. I can't remember, but it was a long ways away from where we were. And I found him down there. But I remember, so I crawled back up and I found my clacker and I looked around and there was just a burnt spot this about 15 feet wide in the jungle where we had been, and there was no one there. And it scared the shit out of me. I'd never been really afraid before like that, but I was alone. I was paralyzed, at least I was paralyzed in my legs. And I thought, nobody even knows I'm here and I'm alive, so they're going to come in and kill me. The other guys are already dead. And that went on for, it seemed like a long time, but it probably was just seconds. But then suddenly John Sowers touched me on the shoulder and he was talking to me. I couldn't hear him because my ears were still ringing from that blast. And then I was able to kind of get up on my knees. So some of the paralysis was going away a little bit, but enough to where I crawled down and got Linder and turned him over so he wasn't drowned, in the water. And then Sowers came down, we pulled him back up, and then we had no radio. The radio had just been fried. And suddenly it was like a miracle. There was a helicopter over us. Well, what had happened? Somebody from the 2nd and 17th Cath was flying through the valley and saw this tremendous explosion and went over to investigate and flew in and then he called in a medevac and they got us out through a penetrator. But that was like probably that was my last mission. I went out on the ground. I did a lot of I didn't want to do on the ground missions anymore. I'd had enough of it. So I did either radio relay or I did on our helicopters we always had to have a belly man. I would became a belly man on a lot of missions.
That's actually a term that I'm not familiar with. What is that role, bellyman?
Belly man probably came from Recondo School, whatever, but we rigged the ropes because
Huh?
when you put a team in, sometimes they've got to rappel in, so you could rappel them. So we've got three sets of ropes and you attach it. And in this case, and we would also put a ladder, like a big ladder that we can drop out. And so you got your two pilots and your two, your door gunners, and one of them's the crew chief, I guess the other one's a regular door gunner
Yeah,
and you. So you're the guy handling all of the stuff. And
I see.
matter of fact, the last mission, we helicopter goes down and kills Hammonds, and we got to get him out. And so we were the only ones up in the air. It was just two of us, two helicopters, and we went back. And I, did my Recondo School stuff and rolled out, the ladder, and then I climbed down and helped get the guys out. The first we took out the crew. We did like three or four. I forget what it is. It was probably three separate extractions, and the last one was Miller and McCann, and I was so adrenaline pumped because Miller is kind of light and stuff, but I got on the back of his low bearing equipment, his stuff, and I just threw him as hard as I could. He almost went out the other side of the helicopter, but there was just three of us in there, so the belly man's in
Okay.
charge of all
So to go back to the lightning story, so then in what you write, you describe that as part of that, you had what I'm guessing would be a very brief experience of feeling that that you arrived in some different place.
Oh, I knew I was dead. I mean, I just felt like I was dead. I died. This is what it feels like to die. And I was really pissed off. I remember how angry at the second that happened. I just like, fuck. That was the last words I said. It wasn't any, that word was used a lot over there anyway, but
Sure.
I still remember that word because then I saw this stayed in this light. It seemed like forever, and which I thought was, I've had dreams about it later. Was I went to heaven. They go, you're not supposed to be here. You're supposed to be in the other place, but we'll send you back or something. I'm joking about it, but I would have dreams about this about dying.
But you do say in what you write that you had this feeling of peace all of a sudden.
Oh yeah, no, I did. When I woke up on the ground, I just remember there was no sound, and for a brief second, it was real peaceful. It was quiet, and then I looked down and saw my steam on my legs and went like, "Oh shit!" Then I came conscious about what had happened, what I'd just been through, because I didn't know if I was whole yet. Until the consciousness came back. There was an early ambush that I'd had in one of my um, earlier missions, and it was it was an ambush, and my claymore had blown these two guys down, and there was three that went into this bomb crater, and um, so I had to search the guy that was closest to me, and Burford to check the other guy, and so I'm over the top of him, and he's not dead. People don't die like they just, like in the movies, And he reached up and he grabbed a hold of my arm, which freaked me out, because I'm going through his pockets trying to check for intel. And I still have the bloody paper that I found on him, and I'm going through his stuff. And I push his hand away and he does it again. And I thought, I just let him hold on to my arm. Well, and I was right. I mean, this close to him. And at the moment of his death, I felt something like hit me in the chest. I swear to God. It just shocked me because I knew when he died, I could feel his hand went loose and his eyes rolled back and boom, something hit me. And I remember talking to, the I would joke about it afterwards with people because I didn't want people to think I was crazy. But then later on, I told that story to one of my guides up in Hanoi that was taking me around, and he goes, "Oh yeah, we believe that when you harm somebody, their soul attaches to yours," and it was just like that person became a human being, and I still fret about that guy. I mean, I still see that guy more than anything, and any other of the dead, I see him in my mind, and it was almost like a religious experience. Matter of fact, I went to the chaplain. We had chaplains, Camp Eagle, and I remember asking this chaplain, like, because I was like, when I first got there, I didn't cuss, I didn't smoke, I didn't drink, and I believed in God, and I, said my prayers at night and did all of that, and I said, am I going to go to hell? Because just one of the favorite sins is thou shalt not kill. And he goes, well, in war, it's not killing, it's murder. It's a much different, it's not murder, but he says it's a different form of killing. And he's trying to, it was like some bullshit rap that he would give to people, which I didn't buy. And I just thought, I just killed another human being. Am I going to go to hell? I mean, if you believe in that story, so I didn't get the answers that I wanted to get, but that stayed with me on till later and later on. So they became human beings to me.
You can't know the answer to this question, but you're describing this guy who's obviously mortally wounded, and you're saying he's grabbing your arm. What is your interpretation of that? Was that just a reflex? Was in some
Yeah.
sense it was just a reflex, or was he in some
Well,
sense trying to connect person to person, or
no,
what's
I think
your
it's
interpretation
because
of that?
I'd shot him in the forehead, so I knew he was going to die. I
Yeah.
mean, there's the wound and the whole back of his head's blown. So I knew he's dying, and it was a reflex. But I don't know why, but I let him hold on to my I guess it was my forearm. And it was like we'd had this little bond, and I still see him, in my mind. And well, I used to have dreams about that.
This might sound like a stupid question, so feel free to bat it aside. But you say that you see that guy, you think about him. Um, what's your relationship with him, with that memory, with those images you have in your head? How would you describe that relationship?
Intimate, it was pretty intimate. It was like I'm with him when he died. It's like being with a parent when they pass away. And I killed him. So it wasn't like this was a stranger that I just come upon in a car accident. this guy is, real. So there was some kind of connection. So I choose the Vietnam idea that the thing that I felt hit me in the chest was his soul.
You do your tour in Vietnam and then you extend. Why did you extend?
Um, Probably the thing I used to say, or the main reason was I could get the early out. If you extended your tour, here's the real truth. If I went back, I was going to go back to the 82nd Airborne. They'd make me jump out of airplanes. And I thought, ugh, I don't want to do that. I don't want to have to go out and jump,
Sure.
be on jump status in the States. And you hear about, they make you shine your boots and you got to salute everybody. It sounded like hell to me. And I thought, I would rather stay here. And if I extend, the true story is I didn't want to go to the 82nd. The truth, the people, what I tell people is, oh, I extended so I could get the early out and go to college. That was afterwards. But by extending, um, it probably saved my life because I was damn. Oh, I say I don't know if it saved my life, but at the end of my tour, I was recruit. I would recruit LRRPs because you got to get guys to volunteer. So I'd, tell them stories to try to get them to volunteer. I wasn't very good at it in the beginning until I started using the McDougal story about, look, you're going to you might be on a fire base or whatever, and they know where you're at, and they don't know where we're at. And I would get guys to volunteer with that story. But so that really made me feel really good about that. But the day that I was supposed to, um, the guys that I came over with, a bunch of them were, they put you in a holding billets, I guess, at the air, and 17 guys got killed. That didn't extend that were going back to the States. And I always thought, wow, I'd saved my life by extending because I would have been in that group of guys. There's always stories like that
Did the
weird things.
did the
Paradox.
plane crash or something like that?
No, no, they got rocket 122, whatever the rocket a rocket came in and hit them. A 122 hit right into that billets.
Just as they were about to head
The
home.
next day, yeah, the next day they were on a manifest to get on a Freedom Bird to fly home.
Wow.
Yeah.
Right. So you extend, I've heard this before, you extend because if you extend, then your time in the army as a whole is significantly
Yeah.
reduced. Right. Yeah.
As soon as I got back to the States, I was out of the army.